So, I'm guessing I'm gonna record part two. So, I want to backtrack a little bit in part two back to the beginning. So, in my early childhood, I I always saw the supernatural. I've always been able to sense the supernatural. The earliest supernatural encounter I ever had is when I was a child, and I remember, I don't know how old I was. I was really young. I was young enough to walk and talk, but uh, um, I remember there was this house that we were moving out of, and there was a toy chest in one of the rooms, and it was upstairs, and my mother told me to go grab it, and I was the only one who entered the house, and I went up the stairs to grab the toy chest, and I remember seeing this old man sitting in a rocking chair. It was a blue rocking chair that they had. I went up to the old man, naive as a child, and I asked him hi. And the old man looked at me before disappearing, and that was the earliest experience I had with supernatural ghosts. I also remember being of young age and seeing like Civil War veterans and like American Revolutionary veterans like around me, and it was strange. But there was also a story I didn't know about, but I do remember this doll. There was this Elmo doll, and I had it most of my childhood, even into my teenage years. And I knew this doll was haunted and it was possessed, which always made me wonder the question why demons love Elmo so much. It's strange to me. But I remember it was demonically possessed, and accordingly to my mom, she said that she would wake up at night seeing me in the crib and a dark hooded figure staring at me while I was sleeping in the crib. Because of course my crib was in my mom and dad's room because they had to keep an eye on me because I would stop breathing in the middle of the night and turn blue because my lungs collapsed when I was born, and I had issues afterward and still have issues today. But yeah, so I've always had strange So, yeah, like I said, I always had strange beliefs, or strange encounters, I mean. But, like I said, I talked about the demon really using me in a vulnerable state to do something very wicked when I was a young kid. But I also had, like, phenomenal stories before that really can't be explained by science, and it can't just be a hallucination. I have been diagnosed with a lot of things: schizoaffective, bipolar, I've some kind of hallucinatory. Like, people always believe that I had some kind of mental illness. But I do remember one particular time in my life that something supernatural happened, and this cannot be explained by science. I don't care how many ways you look at it. So I remember being a little kid, and I was in foster care, and I was sleeping in the basement. And I remember the kids telling me ghost stories in the basement to scare me anyways. But I remember one particular story that they told me, and it was a story of this guy who had hung himself or something, and he haunted the downstairs basement where I slept, and that he was demonic or something. It was, could have been believable. I don't know, but I remember one time I slept and I kept the closet open and the toy box. I remember every night where I would hear clicking in the toy box and coming from the toy box, and I always kept the toy box closed, but I didn't really pay attention to it. But this night was weird. I kept the toy box open, and I remember there was this Transformers toy of the Scorpion from the first movie, if you remember that. It comes out of the desert and attacks the soldiers or whatever. But anyways, that's not the point. But I remember this toy came crawling out of the toy box, and it came and fell to the ground and started walking around the room. And this toy had no batteries. It wasn't like an RC toy. It was nothing like that. It was just a regular Transformers toy that you would transform. There's no way it could have been moving by itself like that. And I also remember hearing growling in the middle of the night as that happened. So it was, not cool. it was strange, and it was the strangest encounter. And nobody ever believed me. Some people still don't believe me in that story, but I know it. It wasn't a dream. It was real life, and it was very real. And I remember it, and that is why I will never let go of the spiritual belief. That's why I'll always hold it, is because of that one encounter. Even no matter how arrogant I sound when it comes to spirituality, because there's a lot of things that can explain away by science, but a lot of it, because of that one night, I'll always believe. But anyways, so when I left, so coming to Christianity, these people that I used to hang out with who were Christian, and these people I used to know in my family and part of my mom's boyfriend's family, they were all, hypocrites. They would do one thing and then they would tell you to do one thing and then do the other. And I just got so satisfied with Christianity, so I split and I became a pagan. And why I became pagan is because, Greek paganism and Norse paganism I was always interested in. I was always fascinated by history of paganism, all that. And I played God of War and Harry Potter and Percy Jackson. I'm not saying those things are demonic, so don't take that. If you're a fan of those things, they're rightly so. I still love those things. But I was really into them, and that could have fed my interest into the witchcraft, into the occult, and also like horror movies and stuff. So I started getting more into that, and I wanted to originally become Satanist, but there was no satanic community in Montana, so I couldn't, I didn't know where to even start. But I did take a very big interest in it, and I studied it, and I studied people like Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley. I never claimed to be a Satanist, but at the time, I did understand Satanism, and at the time, I felt like I agreed with it. Satan was the hero of the Bible. God was the evil tyrant, because that's how I saw him at the time. I thought God was just an evil tyrant, piece of shit. But, so I always, I never claimed to be a Satanist, but I always agreed with it. And I liked Lilith, and I thought she was a real goddess, and, I'll get to her later, because she does have something to do with my journey. But, where was I? Oh yeah, so, so I thought about becoming atheist, but I liked, and I listened to a lot of atheist thinkers, and my whole journey, I studied a lot of atheist thinkers, from Hitchens to Hawkins to, all of them. I read The God Delusion, I read, Sam Harris, I watched the videos, I watched the Amazing Atheist videos, I watched Owen Morgan, I watched all of it. I was really into atheists. I was probably more into atheist content than I was even pagan content. But I always felt fascinated with paganism. But then I found out, because when I started hanging out with pagans, they were saying, well, you're bringing a little bit of too much Christianity into this. It's like, like you're still Christian, but you're being pagan. So I had to back up a little bit, and I had to really get into it. So I got into witchcraft, and I got into spells. And I practiced this stuff, and I practiced these spells, and I practiced this witchcraft. And, I cast curses on people. I regret it, but I cast curses on people, and I did all the work. But the more I got into this paganism, I started to realize that, and I wanted to be pagan too, because I felt like these were the only gods that answered me. Because when I prayed to these gods, I felt their presence. I noticed their aura. I saw shadows, and I noticed something. So I knew something was there in these pagan gods. So that's why I felt drawn to them. And I was drawn to them for like 8 years. But I felt the more and more I got into paganism and Satanism and all these occult practices, I felt like I was giving part of my soul away. Like I had sold my soul. And I started listening to more dark and depressing music and stuff like that. And I felt like I was getting more depressed. And I started watching more occult, really fucked up, gory videos and really nasty stuff on the internet. And I started giving into like lust, and I started giving into like gluttony, and I got really fat. I was really a skinny person, but then I got really fat. When a lot of it had to do with because I was constantly depressed. I was constantly feeling lonely and isolated, and I was constantly just in agonizing pain, really. Both physically and literally, and metaphysically. I was, and with depression and all of it, I was just in a lot of pain, and that's who I was. And I lashed out on people, and it's like my aura got tainted, my soul got tainted. And I got into New Age beliefs, And then around 20, I don't remember what year it was, but I ended up having a gallbladder issue, and I was in a lot of pain, and I was almost dying because I turned yellow from jaundice, and my gallbladder or my liver had swelled up to the size of a baseball, and it was out of nowhere too. It was sudden, so I was like, I was gonna die, and at this moment, I was gonna die. So I went to the hospital, and I had to have 4 back-to-back surgeries, and I had a near-death experience where I flatlined during one of the surgeries, and they brought me back. And I remember what I went through when I got flatlined, and I remember, yeah, hold on. So, sorry about that, my phone died, but to give you, it's kind of night, it's pretty late out, but to finish what I was saying, and I don't remember where I was, but I'm going to start. So yeah, I fell into paganism, and paganism led me down a dark path that was full of depression, full of anxiety, anger, pain, disillusion. I was constantly yelling at people, and I was constantly freaking out at people, and it was bad. And not only that was I mentally and spiritually dead, but I was giving into hedonism. I started smoking cigars, which the last time I did was when I experimented as a teenager. And I was smoking cigars, and I was drinking alcohol, and I was partying every night, birthdays, holidays, everything. Everything was an excuse to drink and party. And I was giving into basic hedonism, and I was, giving into lust a lot, and I was giving into all these bad things a lot, and I was, but, I was spiritually dead, and I thought I was having fun, but I really wasn't. It was losing all meaning. But, so, I think it was 3 years ago, my gallbladder, I had a gallbladder issue, and I went into the doctor, and I flatlined during surgery, and they brought me back. And I remember when I was under, I didn't see the usual black, or, just skip that, it just suddenly wake up that amnesia usually gets. Now, I remember, okay, so it was black. Like, I remember going into cold darkness, like cold darkness, like, like below the worst below you could have in Montana, like during winter. It was cold, and it was darker than the night. Like, I couldn't see anything. And, I remember I kept hearing a woman's voice leading up to this, and I heard a woman's voice kept calling my name after. But I heard like talking and footsteps walking up to me, but I couldn't see them. And the woman walked up to me, and she asked me all these questions. And she told me she knew who she was. And she asked me all these questions. And it was like she was judging me and wanting to find out more about me. And obviously eventually the questions led to, and the questions basically were like, are you ready to die? Do you know how much time you have? You're not going to live till 70, stuff like that. And, why would you want to be with your family? Stuff like that. It was like, kind of like condemnation kind of things, like judgment. And then finally she said, well, it's not your time yet, after I pleaded with her to be with my family. And she put her finger to my head where like the third eye would be. And I remember that clearly. And, yeah, I remember waking up in the hospital. And I shit you not, it hurt worse coming back from the dead than it did going under. And that was the second time I had a near-death experience. And, the next night I had a dream that I was walking, and I was walking down this trail, and it was snowy and wintry, and there was a light above me, and there was this light, and like I was in that blackness again, but there was this light above me, and I kept following the light, and I found myself on a trail, and it was snowy, and it turned out the light was like old gas lantern, and there was people dressed in weird clothing, and they were speaking all kinds of different languages, a language I couldn't understand. And these people, it was weird. They weren't dressed like anything you would see in history. It was like a fantasy movie, really, like a sci-fi movie or something, like something George Lucas would create in Star Wars or something like that, Star Trek. But it wasn't futuristic either. It was like retro, like it was old, like a Roman in a sense. So I started walking and down this trail, and I see a friend that I knew who passed away while I was in the hospital. And I saw him in the dream, and he was walking, and I shouted out his name, and I said, "Hey, I'm over here." And he said, "Hey, you're not supposed to be here. You're not supposed to be here." And I said, "What do you mean?" He's like, "You're not supposed to be here. You're in the spiritual world. You're not supposed to be here." And then as soon as he said that, I got started pushed away, and I started walking the other way on the other direction. And I remember I walked past this large lady who was old and had antlers, green skin, and glowing eyes, like glowing yellow eyes. And I kept walking down this trail, and I found myself under a chandelier, and like this giant chandelier, and for some reason it brought like a hint of nostalgia to me in the dream. And I ended up walking in to this place, this this like giant castle kind of thing where there's a throne. It was like completely made of ice. It was weird, like a ice castle kind of thing. And I saw this old woman sitting upon the throne, and on her left was a young man with long brown hair and a brown beard, and like kind of like what you think what Jesus would look like, but not quite. And then on her left was a woman who was in black with black hair. And then there was a couple other people that came, and they all talked to me, and they asked me a bunch of questions. And then they told me I was not supposed to be there, and I woke up from that dream. Then and it was really weird. Anyways, ended up getting out of the hospital, and I got better, and I was still pretty petrified, traumatized. I didn't know what to think about the whole thing. And we found out one of my friends passes away. You guys probably know him. I'm not gonna say his name, but you know him. And well, I kept having dreams of him, and maybe some were just subconscious, some were probably genuine visits, like the time I saw him in Chili's at the one of the booths that I always sit at, one of my booths that I always particularly like, and we had a conversation there. And but anyways, it didn't take long. Come New Year's that year, I fell back into my old habits. I started eating unhealthy again. I stopped my diet that the doctor recommended me to be on. It would eventually cause health risks later in life that I'm kind of dealing with right now. And I started drinking and partying again because this time I had a new trauma, which was, the near-death experience piled on the traumas that I had before, which pushed me further into depression. And I was suicidal in the past. I attempted to take my life 2-3 different times before. This was probably the fourth time I tried to. Because I was in my apartment that I lived in at the time, and I finally had enough. I tried my everything because I felt like, my purpose in life is to get a girlfriend and have kids and stuff. So I tried dating apps, and I tried everything. I tried so much to get a girlfriend in my life, but it all failed. It all backfired on me. And I found out eventually I was being catfished, and it was stupid. It was all stupid. And so I tried to take my life, and I tried to hang myself with a belt in the bathroom. And when I did that, I suddenly heard a call that said, "No, don't do it." It was a woman's voice, and it said, "No, don't do this. You got more in you. You got time. You still got time. Don't do this." So I decided not to do it, and I decided to take a shower instead. And I listened to music, and I fell asleep early. And I woke up pretty early the next day. I woke up around 3 o'clock in the morning. So anyways, like, I fell asleep, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning I woke up. But anyways, when I had this dream, I had a dream that I was in this funeral home, and my friend was there. And he was all dressed up in a nice suit, and there was a coffin and everything. He was all ready to go, and I asked him, well, what is he doing here? And he said, well, I was waiting for somebody to come. Because obviously, and it's crazy because another person had died, I knew, died a couple months later, or weeks later. And he was talking, and he goes, yeah, I'm just waiting. And he's like, do you want to talk to me about things? And, you know, I had some questions about the afterlife and the spiritual world. And I asked him questions like, oh, do you guys got movies and stuff? And, you know, just a simple materialistic thing, I guess. And he said, well, you know, that's something you're going to have to find out, but we do have actors up here. And I guess he made a joke, and he said, you know, Robin Williams and, who was it? I don't remember. I don't remember. I think it was Jerry Lewis. You know, Robin Williams and Jerry Lewis were making a movie together, and it was the funniest thing I've ever heard. He said, oh, and, you know, John Candy and Chris Farley are also making a movie. It was just a funny joke. But we got on the conversation of spirituality, and I remember in the dream he told me, he goes, you know, I saw God. And I said, and at the time I was pagan, so I was like, you know, I was polytheist, so I believed in many gods. So I was like, so you saw a God? And he said, no, I saw God. He's like, I saw Jesus Christ. And he said that he saw Jesus Christ, and he appeared, and he said he told me that Jesus Christ kind of looked like Abraham Lincoln, and that there was gold statues erected of him, which before this, which was weird. But he said that he saw God and he saw Jesus Christ, and he said when Jesus Christ came to him, he said, Jesus Christ looked at him and said, did you know who I was? And he said, yes, I knew who you were, but I couldn't bring myself to believe in you, and I had a hard time following your rules. And Jesus said, that's all right. You were a stranger to me, and now you're welcome. Welcome home, son. And I remember freaking out in the dream. I remember running from that dream, like straight up into another room that led to a different dream. That was like a laundromat or something. I don't know. But I woke up in a panic, and I was up at 3 o'clock. Literally spent 2 hours pacing my bedroom because I thought about that long and hard. And I said, Jesus Christ is real. Does he really love me? Stuff like that. And there was also some other things in that dream that about the afterlife that he said that I was thinking about. Like, he said that he went to the Garden of Eden, the happiest place on earth. And it made me really think. And then I said, maybe the Garden of Eden is the fields of Elysium. Maybe he was just talking in code. Maybe he actually met Zeus or something. And then I thought, maybe it was just my subconscious. Maybe it was just a dream, you know? So I kind of pulled myself up, and I kind of shrugged it off. But then what really got me is a few days later, I had bought my altar stuff for the first time, and I erected an altar to a goddess I worshipped, which was Freya, a lust goddess. And, well, at the time I knew her as a goddess of love, but she was a lust demon, let's face it. But I erected a statue to her, and I started worshiping her, and that night I had a dream after I erected the statue of her being demonic and trying to attack me. And in the dream, I ran out of my house and into where the cars were, and this lady with white hair came and picked me up, like grabbed me and said everything's gonna be okay, you just have to face her. And she took me back in, and I felt a kind of aura coming from the altar where I had it erected inside my house, even without me being awake. And that's how powerful it was. And the next day, I watched some stuff on Jesus, and I went to my Bible. I had an old Bible that I went to. It was my grandpa's. And I went to it, and the first page I went to said, you cannot have two masters, God and money, or mammon. You cannot worship God and mammon, which is money. So Jesus saying you cannot worship God and money. You got to choose one. And then I turned it again, and the next thing I went to was coincidence, but it was God telling the Israelites, if you worship Baal, you cannot worship me. You can't have two gods. So I thought that was serious. So I thought about it and pondered it, and I'm like, maybe I need to stick with paganism a little bit more. And so I chose the pagan gods, stupidly. So then I got more into witchcraft, and I tore my altar down after I had that dream, but I ended up putting it back up. And I ended up getting back into witchcraft and started performing spells, and I thought maybe if I performed good luck spells and loving healing spells, it would actually work, but no, it only worked temporarily, kind of like a drug, and getting high for a while, but then you get fucked over again, and bad luck comes, and you get even more depressed, and the more spells you cast, the worse it gets. And then I started meditating, because I started practicing New Age meditation and stuff like that. And I started practicing Seder, which is a kind of meditation form of witchcraft. Old Norse, kind of. And I started seeing these gods for who not for who they were, but what they wanted to show me. And the white-haired woman, of course, was what I saw for Freya. And I started speaking with them. And then I started getting like Hindu gods that spoke to me, like Ganesh, Shiva, Krishna. And I started talking to these gods for a while, and then the more and more I went down this road, the more and more my life went to shit. And then I saw Lilith and Kali, more darker female gods, and I started speaking to them and worshiping them. Then eventually, a lot of the bad things kept piling up, and I got kicked out of my apartment and ended up in a camper with my sister. And this is around the time I started deconstructing from paganism. I started exploring other philosophies, such as political ones, communism, capitalism. I thought of myself as I was very hateful, very bitter, so I always saw myself as kind of a fascist. And then I thought maybe I'm more communist. And then, all these stupid ideas. I thought I was an egoist. I thought I was a nihilist. I didn't know what I was. I really didn't. I couldn't find myself. I tried to find meaning in life because I felt like there was none, and we had to create our own meaning. And stupid Friedrich Nietzsche, Max Stirner shit. I read all these people, these philosophers. Looking back at them, I think they were all a bunch of idiots. But I didn't care, so I started, studying it, and I spent all this time in my sister's camper, and then this is when my mental health started getting worse. I started talking to these guys, even while we were driving in cars. I started talking to them, and it started getting worse. I mean, they had good advice at first, but then it started getting worse, and it was like I was inviting them to do more. And the worse my depression was getting, the worse my anger was getting, the worse my paranoia was getting. And then I started falling for conspiracy theories, and I started literally ending up where I was at the end of Christianity. I felt like paganism wasn't offering me what it should have. I started feeling like the gods were tyrants. I started seeing them for what they were, and I started wanting to move to a different religion, which was Hinduism. So I started experimenting with that in Buddhism, and karma and stuff like that, and started studying and studying and studying and more studying, and started seeking again. And like I said, I worked with a lot of dark goddesses, and I worked with a lot of dark gods, but it was, it was something. And yeah, so I started, where was I started journaling, and I started writing my own books, and I talked, and everything started going good for a while. I started wanting to get my books published. I started, everything was going good. I was about to publish my books. I was journaling. Life was going good, and then it wasn't. Life started falling again. And now this was the beginning of the signs of my psychosis. I started having grand delusions. I started having grandiose thoughts. I started feeling like I was a prophet or a mystic or something appointed by the gods. I thought that I had ego death because I was really studying under Aleister Crowley, Jim Carrey, and stuff like that again. And I thought I really had ego death, but I didn't. and then I ended up having a real ego death, ego rebirth, and spiritual awakening. But like I said, I started really experimenting and trying to understand who I was, what I actually believed. And I didn't want people to know that. Of course, every time people criticized me or told me something different, I'd get angry, I'd get spiteful, I'd get wrathful. And, you know, I, I was just a different person, a person I didn't really want to be. And then came the nightmares. I started having really bad nightmares. Every night, I kept having nightmares about shadows and demons attacking. Well, my niece and nephew, my brother, and his girlfriend, my sister and her boyfriend, my dad. I kept having nightmares of demons attacking. And then I thought, well, maybe it's a generational curse. You know, they talk about this in witchcraft. Maybe I can break it. Blah blah blah. So, like I said, these dreams started getting bad, and then I started getting really ego. Like, for some reason, my ego started to inflate. And then, like, I guess my lust and sexuality started to get worse and inflate, and I started having lustful thoughts that were, like, really who I was. And it was getting bad. And I remember when we took a trip to Oregon, and I literally started crying out of no reason multiple times. I started seeing ghosts a lot everywhere I was going, like shadows everywhere. And I started, like, crying and crying and crying. And, like, I don't know why I would cry. Really, honestly, I didn't know. I just felt depressed, and I felt like crying. And then I'd be happy, and then I'd cry. And then I started wanting, I was like a junkie, but for philosophy, music, and all kinds of art. I just wanted more. And then finally on the 4th of July, it just all came crashing down. It's like my mind just exploded. And I started to looking back at it, I really can't quite explain really what happened. It was like a video game. Like, I was playing a video game. Like, I saw what I was doing, and I could control what I was doing, but what I was doing wasn't me. It was like another character. And I threatened people. I threatened children's lives. I became something. I wasn't me. I was almost like I was a demon. A demon was in my skin. And it happened so fast. It happened like a flash of lightning. And then next thing you know, I was homeless, living with my mom. And everyone hated me. And so a couple days later, after sitting some time and really thinking and having constant nightmares, not being able to sleep, I decided to check myself in to a psych ward, and they believed that what I had was a manic episode. So I didn't look into it anymore. Then I decided, okay, well, I need to get further view on this. So I called a therapist, and I ran through all the therapists. At first, they thought maybe I had DID or some kind of ego disillusion or some kind of disease like that. And then they thought I had borderline personality disorder. And then finally, I settled on one therapist who couldn't see me. She said I had psychosis, but for some reason I snapped once again. And I mean, I kept disassociating before this. Like, I kept losing track of time. I kept feeling like I was other people. And I snapped one more time, and I got angry, and I had thoughts of harming this therapist in very evil ways. And then I started going more to therapy and getting good and trying to get better care from my doctor and stuff like that. And all while I was doing this, I was talking to these gods again. I went to these gods and kept saying, "Can you help me? Can you help me? Help me?" And they gave me some good advice, but didn't realize that these gods were the reason why they're the ones who were doing this to me to begin with. And the more and more I asked these gods for advice, the more and more I've had nightmares, and I would commune with this one god who said that they wanted my family and they wanted to claim them. And then that's when I started knowing that something was up with this. It's not right. That's not how these gods should be. And then I just finally decided that enough was enough. I wanted proof. I wanted truth. So I sat down in front of my bed before I went to bed, and I prayed. And I said, whoever's out there, listen to me. I'm done being manipulated here on earth. I'm done being manipulated in the material flesh. And I'm done being manipulated in the spiritual flesh. I want to know the truth, the whole truth, the absolute truth. Tell me it. And I went to bed. And the first dream I had, and this was on July 2nd, same year Ozzy Osbourne died, or same day Ozzy Osbourne died. Because I remember having an Ozzy Osbourne dream before this. I had it because Ozzy Osbourne was big right now. He through his last concert, I was listening to his music, especially Aleister Crowley. Another thing about Aleister Crowley is that's another thing that made me question is if I was being deceived or not, because I was following the same footsteps as him, and according to Ozzy, he went to hell. So I wanted to know if I was on the right path. But anyways, I had this dream. After the Ozzy dream, I had this, because in the Ozzy dream, I was in a concert and I saw Ozzy, and it was just strange, and he looked at me and says, it was kind of more subconscious, it really doesn't got anything to do with the spiritual, but I did have this one dream after that I was in a field and I saw Buddha, and Buddha was meditating, and I spoke to him and I said, so you're the one who wants to talk to me? And I asked him, are you God? And he said, no. And then I said, show me the truth. I'm begging you, show me the truth. I just want to know the absolute truth. And he told me, if you want to know the truth, you have to open your eye. So it's like my third eye on my head opened. And then the next thing you know, I was Simon, or Peter, on the boat, on the water. And I saw out in the ocean, or sea or whatever, I saw Jesus Christ. And he was walking up to me. And mind you, before this, I had another dream about Jesus Christ when I was living at my sister's house and all the nightmares were happening. I did have one more dream, and this was the same Jesus I saw in that dream too. I want to talk about that real quick. So I was dreaming where I was in that same funeral home that I saw my friend. And this was the second dream I had about Jesus, or that confirmed Jesus. And in that dream, I was in that funeral home expecting to see my friend, but I saw Jesus instead. And I sat down with him and I talked with him. And I asked him all these questions. I said, well, you know, if you're God, if you're truly God, then why do you put cancer in people's heads and, you know, stuff like that in children's heads? Why do you allow children to be raped? All this, I asked him the question about all this dark stuff. And he just smiled and looked at me and said, if none of these dark things happened to you or to the world, would you have learned anything? And I said, no, I wouldn't have. He said, exactly. Because you can't have light without darkness. You can't have good without evil. You can't have yin without yang. And it was surprising to me. And it was like, I was at awe. I was dumbfounded. And then he opened a door and showed me the gods that I was worshiping. And he said, it's not my time for you yet. They will cater to your needs until you come to me. And I remember going to those gods and sitting before them and crying my eyes out to them, but they didn't seem to care. And so now back to this dream I was having on July 22nd. So I saw Jesus Christ, and he was on the water, and he comes up, he's walking on the water, and he comes up to the boat, and he tells me, "Are you ready now?" And I said, "Yes, yes, I am. Just show me everything. Show me everything. Don't manipulate me. Don't lie to me. Just show me the truth." And he smiles and he says, "I am the truth, the way, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me." And he pulls me off the boat and he says, "If you really want this truth, just have faith in me and you'll be able to walk on water." So I walk on water, and I'm walking with him, and I'm at all, and I'm smiling, and I'm crying. And he looks at me and he says, "Whatever you do, don't look back." And my dumb ass, I decide to look back. And what I see is the gods that I used to worship: Ganesh, Shiva, Krishna, Buddha, Jesus, or not Jesus, Freya, Odin, all of them. I see all of them. And they're demonic. They're black, and they have red eyes. And they're laughing at me. Shut up! They're laughing at me. And they're demonic, and they're laughing at me, and I see them for what they truly are. And as soon as I notice what they are, I start saying to myself, I fucked up. This is wrong. This is all wrong. I can't believe I messed up this bad. I can't believe I messed up this bad. What have I done? And that's what I kept saying. What have I done? And then, plop, I fell right into the sea. I fell into the water. And I remember Jesus yelling, "No," as I fell into the water. And then he put his hand in the water, and I grabbed it, and he picked me up out of the water and said, "How could you have so little faith in me? Come, have faith in me, and I will show you great things, because I have great things planned for you. Terrible things, but great things." And then he walked with me back to the shore, and he said, "As long as you have faith in me, you will walk back to the shore, and you will return home." And I started walking with him, and then that dream transitioned to another dream where I was on the hill Golgotha, on Mount Olive or whatever, where Jesus was being crucified. And I looked over and I saw the Romans mocking Jesus and the Jewish disciples who were crying and mourning him, including his mother. And they were building a little idol that was a donkey, a man with a donkey's head, crucified to the wood, to the cross. And then I saw Jesus on the cross, on the crucifix, and I looked up at him and I said, "I can't believe they're doing this to you. I did this to you. I was one of these people." And I cried and cried. And Jesus looked down at me and said, "It is finished." And with one, blood came out of his mouth as he died, and it fell right here on my forehead where the third eye was. And I woke up. That morning, I did a bunch of research on Christianity. I went forth back as to the early Christians, and I found a picture that was found in Judea, the area where Jesus got crucified, and it was graffiti of a man with a donkey head being crucified, and in Greek accordingly it translated to, "This is Joseph's God." And I was astounded. I said, that's exactly how the pagans, because it was a pagan mocking God when he wrote that, and I said, that's astonishing, because that's how the pagans were mocking him in my dream. So the next day, I opened my Bible, and the first thing I opened to was the Sermon on the Mount. And I started reading it back and forth. I started reading the Sermon on the Mount back to forth. And it really spoke to me, because the more and more I started reading the Bible, the more and more I realized, I get this. I understand this. I don't know how, but I understand it. And then I got down on my knees again, and I prayed to God. The first time I prayed to God in a long, long time. And I asked him, please, God, take all my demons and take all these devils out of me and away from me. And I had my eyes closed, and when that happened, I felt an earthquake. Like it was going over my head, like shaking. It was an earthquake. And when I opened my eyes, there was a bright light. And I mean, I was in a dark room. It was probably like 12 o'clock at night. And it was a dark room. The only thing on was my TV, which was on idle, so it was a blue screen, and a lamp. So it was a complete dark room. But this room lit up. Like the sun was out in the sky. It lit up with a bright white light, and the white light was radiating from me. And I went to go get something to drink. And when I did this, before this, I went back to reading my Bible, and I started reading the Gospels back and forth. And I decided to go get something to drink, go get water, because I was thirsty. And I walked into the living room where my mom was sleeping on the couch, on the hideaway bed. And she wakes up from a dead sleep, and she looks at me, and she says, "What is that?" And I say, "What do you mean?" And she goes, "There's a white light, like a bright white orb, hanging in the air, just hanging." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I move back and forth, and her eyes are dead center on me, staring dead straight at me. So I turn on the light, and she looks at me, and she goes, "That was the weirdest thing I ever saw." So the next day, I decided to get back on my medication. I finally got, everything started picking up. I finally got back on my medication. I started seeing a therapist, and he was the best therapist I ever could have got. He listened to my spiritual stories, believed me, and was really open about it. And my meds made me feel really good. But honestly, when it comes to psychiatry and therapists, like to say this, I can't think much, a lot of my mental health completely changing and becoming better on the therapist and the medication, because it's like thanking a busboy or thanking a dishwasher for for the restaurant experience. All they did was give you a clean plate. But anyways, yeah, so I started getting better, and then I decided I should go back to church. Like, something was telling me I want to go to church. But I was hesitant at first. I really was. And I was trying to work on my communication skills. I was trying to get back into the society. I was really working with myself. I was still practicing kind of Hindu teachings. I was practicing this form of Rata Shaka, which is a type of meditation that allows you to speak better and communicate better. It was working, and it still kind of works, what I learned from it. But so I decided to get back into religion. So the first church the first church I went to was New City. I got recommended it, so I went to New City here in Great Falls, and they're an evangelist church, and they welcomed me in with open arms. The first day I went there, they were so nice, so loving, so caring. They listened to my story, they listened to my testimony, and they were so very kind and appreciative and very, very loving people. And so I went to this New City. I sang the songs, and I remember listening to the testimony of one of the people, because they had this thing where they show you their testimonies, and I listened to the testimony of one of the people, and it brought me to tears, because his story was similar to mine, about how he struggled with mental illness, and then God spoke to him and changed his life, and it really changed my mind, and it made me cry. And so then I figured out that they were doing classes, and I decided, next time I come in here, I'm going to try one of the classes, get to know people more and stuff like that. So next Sunday comes around, and I'm still trying to do mental health work. I'm treating my mind like it's a dojo and I'm the sensei. You know, get all my thoughts, get all my my brain in control like it's a dojo, and have them have a job planting seeds in the garden, stuff like that. Well, so I'm still working on my mental health. Everything's getting good. Still trying to master myself. So I end up going to church the next couple days, going to the classes, and then we get this one class called the Baptism and Holy Spirit class. I go to it, and I go into it, and I sit there, and we're learning the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And we learn about clarity, prophecy, and tongues. So the pastor starts talking about confession, and he starts talking about confession and stuff like that. And then he starts, speaking about prophecy, and he starts prophesizing people and what they're going to do and stuff. And people were saying it's very accurate, and they were very astounded. He didn't come to me with any prophecies, though, so I didn't know what to believe. And then he starts speaking in tongues, and at first it sounded like gobbledygook to me. I was like, what the hell is this guy talking about? I mean, I was like, this is a joke, right? This is foolish. Like, this is insane. But boy, did I get humbled. So he started going around trying to give people the ability to speak in tongues. They didn't have the ability. And I was like, man, I think this is a joke. I just think this is foolish. But when he went to that first person and he started praying to them, I don't know what it was. But he said something earlier about how when you know how you have the ability of tongues when your tongue wants to confess. Just, it wants to confess. It moves without your control. So then I feel my tongue like wanting, like going in my, like moving in my mouth, like ready to confess. So then he comes to me and he puts his hand on my head and he's like, we're going to pray with you. And he's like, I'm like, okay, let's do this. And as soon as he starts praying, I start speaking a language I had no idea I could speak. And accordingly, it was fluent. Like, it was a mix, according to them, it was a mix of Sanskrit, Arabic, and Aramaic. Languages I had no idea I could speak. I didn't even learn. I know how to speak German. I know a little bit of Japanese. I know a little bit of Arabic. I mean, some Arabic and Sanskrit, which is enough to know, like, chants when I was practicing meditation. But I didn't know it fluently, and I was speaking these languages. Like, I speak 3 of them combined. And it was amazing. But then I was so astounded, and I felt the white light was surrounding us again in the church. So I looked at the pastor, and I give him my confession, and I told him the story of what happened that night when I prayed with the white light, because I'm feeling it again. And he looks at me and he says, my son, you don't need to be in this class. And I say, why? He goes, you've already been baptized in the Holy Spirit. It's like, you don't know this, even if you didn't think you were doing it. That night when you prayed to God, you repented, and he washed you of every sin you've ever committed and will commit. He said, every sin has been washed clean and crucified to the cross with Jesus. You have been cleansed in the blood of God. And I was like, wow, that's insane. And he looks at me and he grabs my head like a father, like a son, to a son, like as if he was a guy going to kiss a woman. And he says, son, I'm going to tell you something right now. You got a gift. God chose you. I don't know what he chose you for, but he chose you for something. And I'm going to warn you. The devil's going to come for you. He's going to attack you, and he's going to try to kill you, because he's going to want you dead. And I told him, I already think he is. I think he's already attacking. And he said, oh, he will. Continue your walk in Christ, and you'll become more powerful in his army. And you'll become more powerful with Christ. And he said something about Christ will never let you go, so don't ever let him go, no matter how tempting it may be. And I started to cry. I broke down crying. I got in my mom's truck, I'm like literally starting to tear up thinking about it again, but I literally broke down crying. And from that day on, I felt blessed. I felt nothing but joy and happiness. The next couple days after that happened, I felt nothing but joy, nothing but happiness, nothing but love. I told my mom that I'm not the same person I used to be. I told her straight up, I said, I haven't felt this happy in a long time. And I feel like I'm 15 again. I feel like a child again. Like back when I was happy last. And my mom looks at me and she goes, you know what the Bible says, right? And I said, no. She says, in the Bible it says those who are reborn in Christ will be like the little children. And it spoke to me. And it was so beautiful. I just couldn't help but cry. So, yeah. After that day, I felt committed to give my life to Christ. I mean, before I fully gave my life to Christ, I was already thinking about getting back into humanitarian work and helping people and loving people. And, you know, I felt like I did everything I needed to, the shadow work, all of it, to heal from past trauma. But, you know, I wanted to already, you know, get back out there and give and give and give and, you know, stop preaching and just give and just give it all. But now I found it through Christ because I opened my Bible, and even Christ in the Bible confirmed it. Because one of the passages I went to it was Jesus Christ telling his disciples to go far and wide, go to the four corners of the earth and spread the word of Christ. And if you have faith, you will be able to speak in tongues, and everyone will understand you. No snakes will bite you. If you handle snakes, they will not bite you. And you'll be able to trample snakes and cast out demons. And basically go and do what Christ did. But to everyone on the four corners. And then I opened it again. And I went to Jeremiah 24, I believe, where it says, where it's a parable about a man going to a temple. And he calls up God and he says, there's two baskets of fruit. In my Bible it's fruit, in other Bibles it's figs, but he says there's two baskets of fruit. What do you want me to do? And I think it's so crazy right now how I'm talking about this story and it's straight up raining. I don't know if you can see that. It's like pouring hard and there's thunder and lightning, all kinds of stuff. It's crazy. But he says there's two kinds of fruit. There's rotten fruit and there's good fruit. Take the good fruit. Take them to the mountain and into the marketplaces of Babylon and give them out accordingly. And then the prophet asks, what about the rotten fruit? And God says, I will give those out accordingly. I will give the rotten fruit to the rotten. Do not worry about the rotten fruit. And it really spoke to me. And every time I open my Bible and ask God, what do you want me to do? He takes me to that. So I decided to stick with these classes, and I decided to want to be part of the service and be baptized. So probably a month, 2 months, or probably 2 months later, or a month and a half pretty much later, I took pretty much all the classes, and I pretty much learned pretty much all there is to evangelize, and they decided, well, now it's time for you to be baptized. And I'm shit you not, as I'm speaking about this, it's starting to rain even harder. But he says, it's time for you to be baptized. And I was like, really? And they're like, yep, come in next Sunday. I don't know what day it is. I don't have a calendar. But he says, come in and we'll baptize you. And they give me clothes and they're like, you're ready to be baptized. You're ready to fully give your life to Christ. And man, I was so amazed. And after I'm done being baptized, I'm going to continue the classes. I got 3 more. And I'm going to continue the classes. And I'm going to be an evangelist. And I'm going to evangelize. And I'm going to spread the gospel as much as I can. And I will get in other videos where I'll share my beliefs. I do have beliefs that kind of go against the grain of the Bible. But not fully. They're not truly heresy. But some people would consider them that. But I'll get into that different video. But I truly believe in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And I truly believe that Jesus Christ lived for us, died for us, and resurrected on the third day. So yeah, that's my whole testimony. Thank you so much for listening to it. God bless. I don't know if you guys see this, but it is straight up pouring. It's amazing. Like, as I was telling my testimony, the best part of my testimony, it just started pouring and thundering like it's crazy.